Hello to those of you arriving in the audience. Welcome to this evening's event. I'm just playing a little bit of music from Wikipedia Hat Note while we're waiting for a few more people to arrive. We'll start shortly. Okay. Just going to stop this beautiful music now. So we can begin this evening's event. So welcome. I'll show my slides again big so I can properly introduce. This is the public panel discussion on the 10th of May 2022 for the project Decolonising Wikipedia and London's Colonial Histories at UAL's London College of Communication. Thanks for attending and being with us here this evening. I'm your host, Lucy Panesar, Project Manager at LCC and UAL's Wikimedian in residence for this academic year. And I'm here with my colleague from Wikimedia UK. Hi, Richard.
Hi there. So I'm one of Wikimedia UK's programme coordinators.
Thank you so much, Richard, for joining us tonight. I've popped there the link where you can find some more information about this project that's been running over the last year. And it also contains recordings from previous events. And that's where the recording of this evening's event will also end up once it's been subtitled and checked, probably in 2 weeks' time. So yeah, we are recording and would also really love to have comments and questions from you this afternoon. Please feel free to post those to the Q&A function. You should see a tool there in your toolbar in the Zoom space on any aspect of what we're speaking about this evening. So just in terms of the structure of this evening's panel discussion, feel really happy to be welcoming to the virtual stage some people I've been working with over the last 6 months in particular on different aspects of this project of looking at London's colonial histories in different ways and through different means, but all technological means which relate in interesting ways to open source platforms, hence this being in the context still of thinking about Wikipedia. And so firstly, after myself and Richard had said a little bit more about the project, we'll be hearing from some participants of the Heritage Lottery funded project that has been hosted by the South London Gallery, but also in collaboration with the Creative Computing Institute and Tech Yard. And that project's been called Places Never Seen. And it's been a youth-led digital exploration of the 1911 Festival of Empire. And those of you that might have attended previous events for this project, you'll know that the 1911 Festival of Empire is a reoccurring historical event that requires a lot of investigation. So it's been really great to work with the art assassins, two of whom are in the audience here today, along with Jasmine from CCI. So they're going to be telling us a little bit about that project and some of their outcomes. And then another aspect of this project over the last year has been working with students at the University of the Arts London, of which there are, we have many colleges and we've got institutes now, and it's a really exciting time to be talking about sort of technology and how it interfaces with issues of social justice and explorations of history through a critical lens. So there's been many students I've worked with over the last academic year on different courses across the university. But this evening we've got 3 students from the MSc in data science and AI for the creative industries, who are going to be talking about the assignments that they produced, where they're looking at decolonising Wikipedia through a critical lens. Yeah, so lots of presentations to come, taking us down different angles and bringing us kind of back to thinking about platforms and technology and, you know, and the democratization of platforms, and what that can do to help to assist with processes of justice and reparation, and empowerment for kind of topics and communities who have felt otherwise. So we will have some opportunities to discuss as a group, and we'd really love you to feed us with some questions and comments towards the end. So for those of you that are new here this evening, or is by way of recap, just to remind people of what this project has been aiming to do over this last academic year. It falls in the remit of what the university now knows as knowledge exchange, which is something universities have been doing for a long time, but we now have a formal name for it. It's exchanging knowledge beyond the university's walls, you know, with the public, with external organisations, in a way that's mutually beneficial for organisations and our students and the kind of wider public and social good. And this particular project aimed at developing an understanding of the role that Wikipedia can play in decolonisation. I've got an asterisk there because I'm going to come back to unpacking that word a little bit. And expanding something that we'd already set up at LCC, which is one of our colleges at UAL, but expanding that across the university so that we could explore what does it mean to decolonise Wikipedia in relation to our different subjects. So we've got data scientists here tonight, but we also have fine art students, fashion students, media and design students. You know, so that's something that we've been hoping to explore this academic year. And through that to really, you know, to empower people with the skills and the confidence they need to be able to edit and create Wikipedia pages, so we can use all this amazing knowledge that we cultivate and generate in the university for public good. And in particular, in relation to the history of the city in which this university is based, London, you know, and its history and its involvement in the colonial projects, and the legacies of that for the people that are living in this city today. So that's something we've been seeking to explore. So the project's kind of aiming to support this bigger political intention, movement, philosophical discourse known as decolonisation, which has many ways, there's many ways that this could be impacted, and many authors I could be citing to unpack this. But for the sake of this project, there's been one statement that I've been using throughout, and one source that I've been referring to, and that's by Tuck and Yang, and a piece they wrote in 2012 called "Decolonisation is not a metaphor," because it quite often can be used as a metaphor or a synonym for kind of your average diversity work of just sort of adding an author or an artist of colour here or there and thinking that we're decolonising. But what their essay reminds us of, and what I've been trying to do with this project, is to really emphasise the point about decolonisation being about equity, about justice, about reparations, and about really kind of the knowledge, communicating and disseminating the knowledge of what the kind of colonial history or what the colonial project did to people's lives and their life chances and the legacy of that today. And in particular, because we're in a university, thinking about what it did to knowledge and the ways that we know. Big word here on the screen, epistemicide, you know, and it sounds like genocide and insecticide, and that's what it means. It's the destruction purposefully of knowledge, and that's what happened under the colonial project. And I think we can see that still happens today in the way that we kind of put certain knowledge ways of knowing above others and disregard other ways of knowing. So yeah, that's something that we've been trying to do with this work, and thinking about the role that Wikipedia in particular can play with this as an open source knowledge platform in which people can have the power to control what is said about a topic or a figure, and not have to kind of, hopefully the intention is not have to be so sort of like, yeah, limited by some of the power structures that surround conventional knowledge production. So over to you, Richard, to hear from what has this meant for Wikimedia UK as our partner on this project this year.
Absolutely. So I'm bringing to it my institutional viewpoint from Wikimedia UK. When the opportunity to work with Lucy on this project came up a couple of years ago now, it was really very exciting because this was something which was very new for us. We at Wikimedia UK, we're a registered charity, and we've done work on equality in general in Wikipedia, but we hadn't really engaged with decolonisation and what that meant for our work and Wikipedia in particular. But what we did know is that it matched very closely with our aims, what we wanted to do. The change we want to bring about as a charity is to share information so that people can be better informed, more tolerant, and understand the world around them. And so a project like this was really a very good opportunity for us to learn more about it and the process of decolonisation, and do something practical at the same time, helping people to pick up the skills needed to share information, to overcome that epistemicide, so that people are able to write things back into history. The way Wikipedia grows is very organic, and it reflects a lot of secondary sources, so books, news articles, academic research, popular histories, but often it can also replicate some of the imbalances within these sources. And so decolonisation takes an extra critical eye. You need the awareness of the imbalances on Wikipedia and in these sources before you can start properly addressing them systematically. Lucy, can we go to the next slide, please? So for us, it was really important to engage with this topic. And so what we're hoping is that Wikimedia UK can learn about decolonisation and we can take it into other areas of our work. There's a potential for this to have a lot of impact, not just as its own project, but beyond that as well, influencing how we talk about these subjects, how we work with other organisations, and this kind of learning experience is very powerful for us. And really importantly, we wanted to make sure that writing on Wikipedia is a democratic exercise. People really can take part in editing Wikipedia. All they need is kind of a guiding hand to help them learn the interface, understand the rules and how that knowledge is set up, so they can then start going in there and changing it for the better. And that open source aspect of Wikipedia is so incredibly powerful. Wikipedia is not perfect, but it has the ability to change. And we want to be part of that change at Wikimedia UK. And it means that projects like the Decolonising Wikipedia network are very important for us and for Wikipedia, and most importantly, for Wikipedia's readers. When you add information to Wikipedia, you're contributing to the information that is publicly available. As soon as something is available on Wikipedia, it appears basically everywhere. It's suddenly so much more accessible. So it's all about making this information, these perhaps hidden histories or overlooked histories is perhaps better than hidden, and making them much more visible. And it's a chance to diversify the stories being told on Wikipedia by looking at what isn't being covered, looking for those gaps and writing that history back into Wikipedia and doing it on such a public platform. And in doing that, we can do our bit to challenge power structures within how knowledge is shared. And so it's been a great project to be involved with over the last couple of years. I'd say that's Wikimedia UK's view on the project. It's been really good to be involved.
Thanks, Richard. I hope you can stay with us for our discussion and we'll see where that leads us today. So I'm going to hand over now to our guest speakers from the South London Gallery. Tell us what you've been up to.
Cool. Maybe we'll do some introductions. So I'm Sam. I'm a former member of the Art Assassins group at the South London Gallery. And I've been working in collaboration with them as a researcher on the Places Never Seen project.
And I'm Harriet. I'm a former Art Assassin, now Art Assassin alumni, and I'm currently studying history with computing, and my previous project experience lies within web design, curation and photography.
Cool. I'm going to try and do my best to introduce Art Assassins, who are central on this slide. So Art Assassins is a young people's group based at the South London Gallery, who do quite a wide range of projects, often in collaboration with guest artists. And some of the more recent projects have been these archive investigations. One was of the Peckham Experiment project in New Cross, and another was working with the Colonial archive from Nigeria and Sierra Leone. And I think the approach that the group has taken on a lot of these projects is sort of taking the original material and sharing and doing some recontextualization of it. And this might involve making new work and adding commentaries and annotations and stuff like this. And so Harriet and I are in this slightly experimental role, collaborating with them as former members who are now in this interzone between sort of facilitating and also actively participating in the project. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the brief for this Places Never Seen project was to work with Lucy to select materials from an archive at the Crystal Palace Museum, which is in Crystal Palace Park in southeast London. And the archive materials relate to the Festival of Empire, which was an event held in Crystal Palace Park from May to October 1911. And I think it's a difficult event to describe, but I like the term that it's a sort of total artwork that included live music, a sports competition called the Inter-Empire Games, a series of theatrical performances, which involved thousands of volunteers, and also these sort of fairground attractions and rides and things and sort of general mass entertainment. And essentially its function was to be a massive propaganda event, primarily to encourage British citizens to emigrate to Dominion countries of the British Empire, such as Australia, South Africa, India. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So I'm going to maybe we highlight a few of the features that we find interesting about the festival. The All Red Route was a sort of miniaturized tour of the British Empire, which was used stage sets and painted dioramas to essentially allow visitors to kind of traverse the whole British Empire in miniature form in a couple of hours. Let's go to the next one. And there was also the Pageant of London, and this was a staging of the history of London from a sort of slightly mythical prehistory time to the present day, with a kind of inbuilt narrative of London becoming sort of the center of the British Empire, and I guess the center of the world in general. as it was envisaged. Can we go one more slide, please? So this was a very high-profile event in that it was attended by around, I think, 4 to 5 million people. And it's been very extensively documented. There are a lot of photo books and promotional materials that were distributed at the time, as well as programs and text and other stuff. But very little of this material is actually on public display right now. And in general, people don't really know that the event happened, actually, in contrast to earlier events in the same vein, such as the Great Exhibition. And so this sort of historical gap was the starting point for this project. So Harry, do you want to go?
Oh yeah, sure. Can we have the next slide, please, Lucy? So I'm just going to clarify how we kind of conducted our research for the project. So at the kind of beginning, before starting any research, we listened to a voice note recorded by the Art Assassins in which they posed questions to us. And this was really useful as it clarified the points of interest that we would then use to explore in our research. Our research definitely presented a challenge in that it was a lot of secondary source material because Crystal Palace burnt down. There isn't that much primary source material to kind of use and draw from. So a lot of it was secondary research. But we also found the use of visual materials, primary and secondary, as useful in the project, and specifically later in the project in the workshops at the Creative Computing Institute, as they were definitely a point of reference throughout. But ultimately, from our research, we gauged that the festival portrayed the idealized colonial settings. So from the diamond mine and the tea plantation scene on the All Red route to the scaled down versions of political colonial buildings from different colonized countries. We also see the might of the British industrialization represented in the railway that connects the All Red route. And like the Festival of Empire, other contemporary festivals such as the Great Exhibition displayed the wealth of resources and materials that the empire provided for Britain. So what we found really interesting is that the festival was supposed to be for, the whole British public. Discounted tickets were put in newspapers nationally, and there was wide-scale involvement of children and young people in the parades as King George's coronation took place in June of the same year. So clearly there was a lot of effort made by organisers to ensure that this event was solidified in the national collective memory. And this is also echoed in education at the time, with the Colonial Office for Visual Instruction Committee, or COVID Committee, developing an empire-wide scheme of lantern slide lectures to instruct the children of Britain about their empire and the children of the empire about the mother country. So clearly the survival of the empire rested on Britain's protecting its legacy. And so we understood that the festival is the empire from the British point of view. And with our research, kind of aim to understand who had been excluded from this narrative and see if we can, what we can do to illuminate these voices. Next slide, please, Lucy. So as Sam mentioned before, we conducted some workshops with the Art Assassins. Our early workshops were mostly about gauging a response, any response really. After presenting our research, we broke up into small groups to process the information and give the Art Assassins a chance to ask any questions, which is really important for us to kind of bridge the gap between such a large amount of information, and kind of create a space for informal discussion and revision of complicated history. So following this, we gave them a brief and clay to form their responses. Using clay in the early workshops definitely helped bridge the gap between our research and the creation of the final outcome, being the 3D worldscape. And some of the sculptures, as you can see, like in the slides, did actually end up being placed in the VR world. So I think from my experience in education and informal education at university, my biggest, I'm not sure how to say this, maybe annoyance is the right word, I'm not sure, but I find it difficult, and that you can't always get to respond artistically and emotionally, as contributions to academia are usually encouraged to be neutral and without emotion. And so the clay workshop was really important to me to kind of give the art assassins the space to express and reflect on an emotional reaction to this history. And I think this kind of shows the duality of the project, which I think is one of my favorite things about it. The Wikipedia editing side of it gave us kind of a platform of this neutral and factual revision. But with the creative workshops and work that we did at the Creative Computing Institute, we're allowed to develop our kind of emotional and creative responses, which I really enjoyed. And the art assassins also responded really well to. So as I said, in the latter part of the project, we collaborated with Jasmine and TechYard and did workshops at the Creative Computing Institute. So I'll pass on to Jasmine to talk about that.
Hello, can everyone see me okay? I haven't done this. I can still see Harriet. But yeah, it's cool. I think maybe you can.
Next slide, Lucy.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Harriet and Sam. I think you've like summed the project up really well. And yeah, I'll just quickly say a few words, because I think that kind of history and context behind it was the main part of the project, really. But yeah, like I'm Jasmine, and I run TechYard with the CCI, which is a creative computing club. I work with a wide range of people, but really try to centre local young voices or marginalized voices in general, like even outside of London. And the whole aim of the club is to open critical conversations in the creative computing space and to upskill whilst doing that. So when Lucy and Wikipedia and South London Gallery came to me with this project, I said an absolutely humongous yes, because it ticked literally every box. And it has been a really beautiful time working with the art assassins and Harriet and Sam, and just a huge credit to them. This is a lovely picture of us actually at the CCI after our first world building workshop. So yeah, that is what TechYard does, and this collaboration with South London Gallery was a really big one. I did 4 workshops with them in total, and we've got this beautiful outcome that I'm going to show you in just a second. But yeah, I think basically my job was to come in and really get this into some sort of virtual world. So we worked with free web-based software called Frame VR and kind of collated all of this knowledge, this whole open source approach, just to mention that like the technology we used was also open source. Everything just complemented each other so well, and Wikipedia as well, you know. Yes, of course it is not unproblematic, but I am really here for how open it is and what a web of like knowledge it is, and yeah, how it can continue to evolve. So yeah, the whole thing made a lot of sense basically, and we built this virtual world together that really, I guess, retold this story with a different narrative. And yeah, we kind of like used virtual reality and even some 3D scanning to get those clay objects in there. I feel like it was a really collaborative project. All of the assassins kind of dipped in and made something. And very, very quickly, I know we are running slightly over, so I will hand over to Sam now just to quickly show you the world. And yeah, just to say that like I am really happy with this, and like here's to more collaborations like this. So thank you so much.
Great. I'm going to see if I can load this up without too many tech issues. Is this an okay level of smoothness?
Yeah,
We're
all
looking
good.
at?
All
Great.
good.
Fantastic. I think in planning for this sort of moving to a fully digital space, we considered quite a few sort of ways that we could frame this. We were quite interested in the idea of a sort of counter exhibition that would involve appropriating elements from the original festival, but then sort of recontextualizing them or altering them, or even just adding like a layer of commentary or annotation over the top. And a lot of that was done through physical processes, using collage and annotation and just reconfiguring work by hand, but still keeping the original archive materials. So these are some of the figures that have made their way into the final outcome. I don't know if there's any highlights that people want to check out while we're in here. I know this character, I think this is Jordan's King Lud character, and this has come from the prehistoric pageant scene, which obviously doesn't have any basis in reality, and so it involved some total fictional work on the behalf of the festival organizers. They create this sort of founding myth for the British Empire with this totally made up character called King Lud, which Jordan made a model of. I think we were quite interested in these sort of entry points into the archive that were a little bit uneven. They included fictional elements or sort of gaps in the historical record. We felt like it was possible to take ownership of them a little more.
I think you can see a lot of the visual references that we kind of had throughout the project. So you've got like the all red route kind of guiding, you've got the annotated Wikipedia entries and descriptions. And yeah, I'm really happy with the outcome. I think it's definitely stays within the theme of kind of open source knowledge, and the software and website as well was also free and easy to use, meaning that the assassins could also like go home and engage kind of to whatever extent they wanted to. So yeah.
So maybe we've given enough of an initial tour now, so maybe I'll stop the share now. And Lucy, we can hand back to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sam, Harriet and Jasmine, for sharing some insights into the project. Fantastic. And it's great to see the full tour of the virtual world you've created. Brilliant. So I'm going to hand over in a moment to colleagues from the Creative Computing Institute. I've just posted there to the chat to the audience. Feel free to start posting any comments and questions to the Q&A. I think we've managed to get ourselves back on time, fellow panelists. So at that point, I'm going to hand over. I'll start sharing slides again. And let me know when you want to advance to your slides. I think I will just give a brief introduction to my colleagues. As I said before, Creative Computing Institute is one kind of department or institute of the university where we've managed to do some fantastic in-curricular work. So like actually bringing decolonisation of Wikipedia into the curriculum as part of the students' course or syllabus. And it was great to approach the Creative Computing Institute and be put in touch with Louis, who I'll hand over to in a moment to introduce what happened with their course, MSc for Data Science and AI for the Creative Industries. Louis, do you want to tell us how this all came about?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Lucy. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to the assignment that we carried out with the students, then we'll pass over to the students to hear about the projects they did. So yeah, first time I met Lucy, the like immediately interesting things was like the two different ways that we were generating knowledge, or like kind of the evidence, I guess, to support changes to Wikipedia, which was kind of the end game. She was talking about how she'd just been at the Crystal Palace Museum, kind of going through like kind of dusty archives in basements and stuff. And as we're kind of talking about how we might do stuff, I'm kind of like, where are the database files? Are there like APIs for that? Is that on the internet? Which is kind of one of the necessities for like working in the way that we work as kind of data scientists. So we did a really good session with the students using the Legacies of British Slavery dataset. Big up to Keith McClelland at UCL, now retired. He gave us some really great resources for that. It's a project that was worth checking out. So I set the students a task of considering how a data-centric approach might be useful in updating a Wikipedia page through a decolonial lens. Given that a lot of the data isn't, or the information wasn't collected or digitized, we kind of gave space in the brief for the students to consider what data might need to exist for them to do their analysis, and kind of inspired by Mimi Onua's project on missing data sets. They could perhaps reflect on why it's missing, if that's the case, which is kind of interesting from a decolonial point of view as well, about kind of what gets recorded and what gets thrown away. So I'll hand over to the students.
Thank you, Louis. I'm just going to go through these are the questions. And this was a list that I offered to the students if they wanted to choose an example that we'd already identified related to London colonial history, or they could choose their own. And you'll see that the students did a combination of both. So I think our first speaker, Xiaoling.
Hello, everyone. Hello, this is Xiaoling. I study in MSc Data Science and AI for the Creative Industries. I'm going to give a brief introduction of a plan to edit the Wikipedia entry of East India House from Decolonize and Data Science methods view. Next slide, please. So first of all, East India House was the headquarters of East India Company. The British East India Company has a corporate history spanning 258 years. The British government granted the East India Company monopoly powers in the form of charters, helping it to grow rapidly. At that time, East India Company was not only a business company, but also a colonial tool of British government. Next slide, please. There are many things to be told about East India House, including its contribution to colonial history, its legal and illegal trading activity, and architectural achievement, etc. Yet only limitation information is displayed on Wikipedia. Those information are collective and may lead in a biased understanding to readers, in my opinion. Next slide, please. Given some informations are absent, what should we do if we want to complete those information? I think we should be collecting data from three aspects. And first, data contents, including cultural artifacts, volumes, etc., from colonized territories between 1600 and 1858. Second, data attribute, objective data without bias and original primary documentation, which could reduce minors, realism, or other facts. Last but not least, the data dimension, time, location, goods, events, motivation, process, outcome, race of people involved in the data, etc. Next slide, please. I believe we can use data mining, statistical inference, and machine learning methods to help add anti-colonial information entries and reflection to the Wikipedia entry of East India House. Firstly, we can use data mining methods like web crawlers to target search for the related data content from the British Museum to the colonizer between 1600 and 1858, such as cultural works, artifacts, volumes, which I obtained as a dataset from the colonial countryside. We also need to obtain related information from the colonized countries, as so the internet or field research as a dataset from the colonized countryside. Once we complete the data mining on those two available datasets, we can use statistical approaches to manually classify and identify, like a cluster, colonial related information and laws, and then summarize those laws to the machine learning code logic. We also can identify new problems, so integrate machine learning. Data collection efforts such as cloning are repeated to collect new data, analyze and iterate on the core machine learning code to produce a quality result or reduce workload for other researchers. Finally, we can manually review and double check, etc., to ensure no major omissions and upload accurate Wikipedia entry information. Next slide, please. The table is a tentative illustration of datasets based on the data dimension needed as mentioned above. We can also add the personal data recorded in the table in the future. But of course, it's just an example. The table should be adjusted later based on detailed data collection and methodologies. Next slide, please. At the end of today's talk, I'd like to propose some of my aspirations to the future. I adore data science methods, but it also faces various challenges. And I think the first challenge is operational aspect. Methods of statistical inference and logical implementation of machine learning are the technical difficulties. And I think the second challenge is outcome aspect. Machine learning outcomes are possibly not as accurate and flexible as professional researchers. And the third challenge, I think, is practical application aspect. Because of the open nature of Wikipedia, the low threshold for modification may be modified by others for a variety of reasons, and it's difficult for us to guarantee the accuracy of the adjusted reasons. And I think the methods also have three advantages. The first advantage of the methods is being more objective. The data science analysis is more scientific than traditional textual descriptions, providing an intuitive sense of the comparison of data volumes, and can provide more comprehensive data for indicator analysis. The second advantage of the methods is being faster. Once the machine learning has been trained, we can update the words more accurately and rapidly, and the system ability and implementation process is much faster than manual work. And the third advantage of the methods is being more exploratory. We may be able to unearth more untold facts and unravel existing historic mysteries. However, the limitations are also obvious. Those in methods are highly data dependent. And I think the fourth limitation is data saturation. Those data-centric approaches need to search for adequate data to get more accurate results. If the amount of data is small or the coverage is short, results may have missing severe information and errors. And the second limitation, I think, is corporate selection. As a learning database for machine learning, the corpus also need to be accurate and have certain uniformity and standards. Next slide, please. This is all I want to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chris-Anne.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. My name is Chris-Anne, as you can see on the slide, and I'm going to give you an extracted and compressed version of my report and findings based on the brief we were given. As you can see before you, I've provided an outline of what's to come, who I've chosen, the Wikipedia entry in question, and I will very likely touch on the data-centric approaches, seeing that my classmate before me did an amazing job giving in-depth detail on the matter, and then some key takeaways. Next slide, please. So who is Jan Smuts? He was a South African statesman, military leader, and philosopher. He served as Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa. Next slide, please. So why have I chosen this historical figure? There are two reasons why. At the start of the assignment, Lucy provided us with an extensive list of Wikipedia entries and websites that could use some editing through a decolonial lens. This led me to toppletheracist.org. It's an interactive map featuring statues honoring and commemorating the achievements of those with colonial history. And not only that, I myself am South African, born and raised. And in South Africa, we have a few highways and streets named after Jan Smuts. And during my time in school, we had learned about him as well in Afrikaans and in English. Now, to get into more technical information about Jan Smuts and why I've chosen this entry, the two key politicians at the time were Jan Smuts and JBM Hertzog. Both were strongly in favor of segregating South African society and later introduced segregation into the city, the workplace, and politics. And the focal point of this presentation is that of residential segregation. Next slide, please. As you can see before you, I've provided an apartheid laws timeline. And just in case some might not be familiar on what apartheid was in South Africa, apartheid was racial segregation specifically, a formal policy of segregation, political, social, economic discrimination against the non-white majority in the Republic of South Africa. This slide does not have all the laws that were passed in South Africa. I've only extracted and highlighted the ones that use the Native Lands Act of 1913 as a blueprint to enforce further segregation. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the focus was on residential segregation, and the Native Lands Act was the first of its kind in South Africa. This law was passed by Jan Smuts during his time as Prime Minister. So just to quickly touch on that law, the Native Lands Act of 1913 prohibited Africans from owning or renting land outside of certain territory designated as native reserves. This domino effect of laws enforcing segregation eventually led to the Population Registration Act of 1950. If anyone would like detailed information about anything that I've just spoken about, I'm very happy to share that. Next slide, please. So to quickly go over the Wikipedia entry in question, I've provided a screenshot of it. And a disclaimer, by no means am I here to demolish someone else's work. As you can see, it shows how he was a vocal supporter of segregation, but it doesn't delve deeper into the topic, which I found interesting because the Wikipedia entry as a whole gives great detail into his accomplishments, which led me to wonder why this section does not highlight the fact that he introduced segregation to South Africa. So the question pops up of why. Why is there lack of information? Next slide, please. There could be many reasons why. One could be that the narrative differs significantly across sources. Every scholar, author, and academic may have approached the subject from a different perspective. Other reasons behind omittance could be separated into categories of personal bias, language barrier, and lack of accessibility, just to name a few. What do I mean by lack of accessibility? Most of the in-depth archives on Jan Smuts' work are sitting in libraries in South Africa and remain offline. So what can we do to make data accessible to all? And I think this is where data-centric approaches could possibly help. Next slide, please. So we can begin by using approaches such as an OCR scan and OCR means optical character recognition. I'm not too sure if anyone has used this before. So if you have an iPhone or an Android device, or even use Google Lens, you can take your device, open the camera, hover it over an image that has text, and it allows you to extract the text from any image, and it makes it editable as well. If we were to use that method on historical documents, this could lead to archival digitization and online accessibility to all. I think it's an excellent form of preserving the past, making data available to all, and developing language translation. But again, like most things, data-centric approaches are not without flaws. Next slide, please. This way of documenting history is time-consuming and costly, not to mention it also requires the need for human interaction and engagement. An unbiased representative would need to upload all the relevant documentation without fail. And if that is not possible, what can we do in the meantime when we approach either a new body of work or either personal or academic work? What can we do when we're faced with similar challenges? Next slide, please. In conclusion, the best we can do is ensure that a data set is as extensive and as diverse as possible. When we see a correlation between timeline and facts, we do our due diligence to cross-reference and accurately report on topics. And furthermore, to try our best to think critically and place more intention behind our research and question even ourselves every step of the way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Chrisanne. Totally illuminating. Oh, I'm already thinking of lots of things to be discussing when we get to the Q&A. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over now to our final guest speaker for this evening. Urel, are you ready? Are you there?
Hi.
Hi
I'm
there.
Urel. Glad to be here. I also study in data science and AI for the creative industries. I enjoy visiting different museums. When I was visiting the British Museum, I noticed some collections from northwestern China. I found that most of them are shipped to the UK by a same person named Mark Orestein, who is the only character of my topic today. Next slide, please. Let's start to see a screenshot of Stein's collections, which is from the official website of the British Museum. Next, please. So, who is Mark Orestein? Here are two groups of texts which are absolutely different. On the left side are the views from the British society. He did expeditions several times in Central Asia and shipping lots of local relics to the Europe. He got these titles: archaeologist, adventurer, ethnographer, geographer, linguist, because of his exploration career. However, on the right are the opinions from Chinese society. Most people think he took their thousands of artifacts away from their home by cheating and dishonest way. People even regard him as a robber. As for his Wikipedia page, I found the content are different in English and in Chinese. It may imply that he plays different roles in two countries. Turn to next slide, please. Let's see the evidence of the different attitude. This is a little part of Sir Mark Orestein's Wikipedia page. If you live in the UK, you probably know him as a well-reputed archaeologist. He did 4 times expeditions in the Central Asia. What's more, he got lots of honors, which list on the page, such as Founders Medal by the Royal Geography Society, and he was honorary doctor of 3 famous universities, including Cambridge, Oxford, and St. Andrews. The next, please. This is the page in Chinese. Actually, it is much shorter than that in English, because it only contains 2 parts. the early life and the expeditions. The main different content is about expeditions. Here is detailed description of geographical information about where he explored in China. As for the owners, there is no paragraph about owners in Chinese page. Next page, please. Let's have a quick glance of the main differences that I mentioned before, and just skip to the next slide. All right, think about it. Why does it show different? As we know, the reasons are complicated. It may relate it to the background of contributors, imbalanced economy, politics, history, and culture. The differences between Wikipedia pages in various languages perhaps are essentially historical and cultural gaps, like many other divides in the world. Is there any possibility to show a same content for everyone? Is it necessary? In my opinions, yes. Ideally, if Wikipedia pages are acceptable for everyone, that will be perfect. I'm not saying there isn't any debate on the internet anymore. And imagine that everyone can receive multiple views, have the chance to know reliable information for different sides. It may be an ambitious perspective. We may start with reducing the divide, just like Lucy's team's doing. Next slide, please. For instance, back to the case of Mark Overstein, if I plan to edit his page, I'll collect information from these 3 points. First of all, I'll try to collect multiple sides of opinions. Secondly, obtaining data from reliable institutions is important. The last point, I'll try to scrape the objective data and analyze it. Some potential insights probably hide in this objective evidence, which is unavailable for humans who only read subjective thematic information. Please turn to the next page. In the following slides, I'll show you 2 pieces of draft. The first one is about social assignments. In general, British society tends to emphasize his contributions to the archaeology. Chinese society prefer to emphasize his negative impact of ancient ruins and their traditional culture. Well, which is absolutely reasonable. The next slide, please. I roughly organized the data of Stein's collection. Look at the graph. Y-axis means locations and the X means categories. The white block means none. The red one means exist. So we could tell that most of the collections are in the London, especially in the British Library and the British Museum. Letters and the manuscript are the most common types of the collections. Turn to the final page, please. Let's think about the challenges and our future path. Firstly, it is challenging that contributors are ideally supposed to be bilingual, because colonialism mostly happened to more than one countries. If possible, we should try to edit pages in different languages at the same time. Secondly, being objective and neutral is challenging as well, which requires editors' strong critical thinking. What can we do from now on? Firstly, I argue that it needs to invest more to recruit majority volunteers to edit and review when updating the editions. Secondly, it is always important to distinguish the reliable information. Quoting different voices objectively may be an appropriate way to supplement the complicated situations. Last but not least, pay attention to the data bias. It is a permanent issue that data-driven analysis sometimes solidifies the stereotypes, although it gives us lots of potential insights as well. It is always worth to pay more attention to verify sources, review the findings, and well-organize the information. That's all the things I'd like to share today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much, Ural. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good. Thank you. Oh, well, just really excellent responses to that assignment. They totally blew me away when I looked at the pieces you've written, and your presentations today have kind of given even more. So thank you. That's been really generous for you to share so much, insights there into your research. Well, that brings us to the end of our panel presentations for this evening and gives us time to have a discussion amongst ourselves and to address any comments or questions that come in from the audience. I can see that a few people have turned their cameras on. If everyone else would like to join us, feel free. That'd be great, and to chip in where you want to. There's one question come in, but before we address that question, I just wanted to see if the panel, now that you've heard each other's presentations, did you have any questions or comments you wanted to make to each other?
One thought from me, which is, all right, two thoughts. Some fantastic stuff there. I'd seen some of that before. I especially like the VR exploration and how you use those visual resources. It's a really cool way of exploring it and annotating those things as well. And that final example with the different language Wikipedias and their approach to the same topic is so instructive. I think it shows basically those different cultural views on the same person and how that colonial past shapes the information today. And that kind of difference is unsurprising between those Wikipedias. It is disappointing, but importantly, I think it's important to spotlight those so that they can be addressed. That's certainly given me plenty of food for thought.
Definitely, Richard. I really think that too. Just, yeah, unsurprising but disappointing. Important to spotlight it. Just that awareness that you've brought that to us, in particular, Ural, with that, just showing the different context. But I think that kind of came out in what everyone was presenting to us today, like the difference it can make when a topic is looked at from a different perspective, and when new audiences are offered bits of archival information that might not have been seen yet by certain audiences, and what people have to say about that. I don't know if Harriet or Sam wanted to comment on what that was like for you, of kind of approaching this information for the first time. Did either of you want to comment? Sorry to put you on the spot. No.
Harriet's asked if you could repeat the question.
Oh, sorry, Harriet. Yes, it's just to say, like, what was that like? We saw there from our CCI students, like, what it was like approaching a subject with fresh eyes from a new perspective. And I got the sense that that's what it seemed like for you both, Harriet and Sam, and the art and the rest of the art assassins, of like looking at these archival materials from sort of fresh eyes.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of presented a bit of a challenge in the sense that there were so many different directions we could have gone in, and I'm very happy that we were able to have like meetings kind of like every other week, because it was so easy to go off on tangents and get a bit a bit like diverted from the Festival of Empire itself, because from looking at the festival, we can understand so much of the wider context, political, social, and economic of the time. So that's something I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I was also thinking, something that I found interesting about looking at the Festival of Empire archive was the connections that it had with just the creative industries in general, and how much of a role that played in this sort of power projection and messaging, which took place in kind of reinforcing sort of empire's image. So I think it was interesting that sort of we, as people who are working in the creative industries, can analyze a project from that perspective and sort of think about how are these tools being incorporated to work in tandem with other elements.
I think also that just to expand on Sam's point, kind of using Wikipedia, I think it really brings the project kind of outside of just the kind of theoretical like research basis, and allows us to apply some of the changes in real life, like kind of knowledge exchange, as you said, Lucy. So yeah.
Definitely, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I think just to comment on what 2 points there, Sam, the role that creatives played historically and to this day in kind of propagating ideology, whether that's ideology we care to enforce or now not. I think that was really interesting, and I'm really glad that's why we kind of carried on exploring this in such a kind of creative way for the Places Never Seen project. But yeah, in both of what you've just said there about accessibility, Harriet, how to, just making sure that this information can be accessed readily, but also understood easily by audiences. And that's what I think is just the power of Wikipedia has the power to be like that. Obviously, it's still subject to whoever edits a page. A page can still come across as quite dense and hard to read, depending on who's edited it. But I felt like you were touching upon that a little bit, Chrisern, in what you were exploring with Jan Smuts and your research of this idea of accessibility and making the data accessible and available. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, for myself, when I was approaching the report, I couldn't just do a report and then put my own opinions. I signed up here in the United Kingdom. I signed up to the Institute of Historical Research, as well as reach out to the libraries that I still have connections with in South Africa. And then it became like using the internet and using these different sources as well, and then putting everything sort of together. That really gave me like an accurate sort of like picture and depiction of like what I was talking about as well. And it makes for better storytelling, in my opinion.
Definitely. And I think when we're in, as well as thinking about the role that creatives have played in propagating ideology, institutions such as the university have played a big role, haven't they? And the museums of sitting on information and whether they've made it accessible or not. But I think like what you've all demonstrated there today is with the sources that we've had access to, it's that pulling on them and bringing these things together. But I think consciously, all of you thinking about, I think critically about this idea of neutrality or objectivity versus subjectivity and emotion, and that comes about with understanding these stories. I felt that all of you were exploring that in different ways, and there might have been moments of subjective response to what you were finding, despite a kind of academic, expectation to remain neutral. I don't know if anyone wanted to comment on that particular aspect.
Yeah, that's something that has like kind of just irked me throughout formal education. There's just no space for, especially like for people who have like personal connections to these histories. I think enforcing that it has to be neutral and emotionless is kind of a way of controlling the response that people give. It means that people won't be outraged because they can't be, in my kind of, from my perspective. So that's always how I've understood it. And I think that things like Wikipedia and open source knowledge, it helps kind of combat this.
I wondered if I could get a point of view from Richard from Wikimedia, because we've kind of touched on a little bit about how maybe a like quantitative or data-centric approach might be considered more objective in some ways. We've also, I mean, there's definitely like massive like holes in that as well, and we're like, you know, I think it was Iral touched on like the data, the bias that exists in data, and like considering like who recorded the data, where did it come from, etc. But I was just considering for Richard, if someone is suggesting an edit to a Wikipedia page, is there like a hierarchy of like sources that are like taken into account, and like when someone's like moderating that? So if someone kind of was to present stuff maybe from a different type of source, like a more qualitative source, or someone was going, I've got this like nice graph, or this like maybe more like a quantitative approach, like how does that kind of play out?
So Wikipedia's content should all be based on what it describes as reliable sources. The idea being that these sources will have been through some quality control process, whether it's peer review process for academic sources, editorial processes for, say, news sources, or institutional websites. It's a bit of a slippery term because there are just so many types of sources out there. One principle Wikipedia has is that all this information should have been produced somewhere else first. So basically, if you have one piece of information and a second piece of information, and you kind of mash them together and come up with this conclusion, unless that conclusion has been explicitly stated somewhere else, you can't say it in Wikipedia. So you can have a situation where something seems really obvious to you, and might be really obvious to everyone else, but you couldn't write it into Wikipedia explicitly. So you might have to just settle for putting that those first two pieces of information without the conclusion. In terms of what sources can be used, so it tends to be a lot of ease of access does tend to come into it, stuff that's easy to find online. It's not always just digital sources, but the easier something is to find, the more likely it is to end up in Wikipedia. But Wikipedia's writers definitely prefer stuff that's been through peer reviews or academic books, academic journals. Those are all very good sources, and things that have come from reputable university presses. Sources which are self-published, for example, which can be very useful sources of information, are treated with more suspicion because it's not always immediately clear how useful that is or what the author's expertise is in that area. And so that can be sometimes more difficult to integrate that kind of information. Now, when it comes to adding information from data sets to Wikipedia, it certainly can be done. It kind of depends how, because you're kind of straying towards the area of looking at this data and saying, well, I think it's quite obvious that you've got this piece, this conclusion coming out of it. So, and then including that in an article. Does that count in Wikipedia's terms as original research? In academic terms, yeah, Wikipedia uses original research in a different way to academics. So it gets a bit tricky. But the thing with Wikipedia is that you can go into an article and you can change it yourself. And if someone is unsure about that edit or wants to discuss it, it can start a dialogue. So it's not always just a matter of proposing making a change. You can go and make the change and see what other editors think. And they might say, I'm not quite sure if this is the right kind of source. And then you can say, well, actually, I think it's useful for this, this, and this reason, or it's a brilliant, it's fantastically researched data set. We should be using it in this way, and put forward that case. So Wikipedia's internal power structures about how information gets out there. I'd advocate for going in, adding that information, and seeing what happens next, really.
Cool. Thank you. I realised that was a bit of a can of worms to be opening. But yeah, thanks a lot. It's really it's interesting to know, like, if some of our students were to take some of their original research and try to use that to update Wikipedia pages, like how that might play out.
There's a lot of learning along the way, but as Richard said, and from my kind of only 1 year now of experience of editing Wikipedia pages, and not full time when I can, I think it is about kind of it feels like you're making a kind of proposal in real life. Okay, I'm going to try this and then see what the community make of this. And if I've written something that does tend to look like I'm drawing my own conclusion, then lo and behold, someone might come along and edit that so it does appear more neutral. And you kind of see that as the part of the collective effort at trying to ensure that the information still comes across in the most balanced way, but can still point to other sources that might, lead people in other kind of directions. But I was curious to know, before there is a question in the audience that I want to address, but I was just wanted to know, out of the people that presented today, are any of you likely to now go and put any of these findings into real Wikipedia editing, or are there still things that stand in the way? I know that there has been for me sometimes, like lack of time or lack of information, or how do I phrase it? It's not the same as writing an essay. I wondered if anyone wanted to comment on that in the group here. Or has anyone already done it? Maybe people don't want to confess to it here. As we like to say in the Decolonising Wikipedia network, there's no obligation to be doing this under your own name. I have a kind of pseudonym for some of my editing. So if you want to keep that discreet, then that's fine. Okay, I'm going to move over to the question in the chat. Somebody has asked us how this information can be used in the primary and secondary education sector in mainstream schools. A lot of students are asking for the curriculum to be decolonised, but due to curriculum constraints, they are forced to use platforms like Wikipedia for their information. Thank you so much for posting that question. Really, really interesting. I've got some things to comment on that, but I wondered if anyone wanted to sort of, respond to that. Those of you that have, it's not that far away since you might have been in the secondary education sector. I know it was a long time for me.
I think I could briefly start, and I think if the audience member is comfortable to expand on what those curriculum constraints are, that would be really helpful contextually, but also no pressure. But yeah, I completely hear this. And again, it's a little bit of a can of worms. I guess my only comment, it's a little bit vague and more overarching, but for me, decolonising a curriculum feels really similar to this idea of anti-racism, which is really, really different to classing yourself as not racist. Like, being anti-racist is when you are willing to take a proactive approach to making changes, and that can be very much within your reach. It can be next time you're at a family dinner and your uncle says something weird, slightly correcting them. It can be working with like local councils on a bigger scale, whatever. Like everyone has to like work within their means and do whatever is comfortable for them, especially when we look at this idea of allyship. And decolonisation feels really similar. I mean, I work in higher education. I haven't got experience in primary or secondary, but from my experience of actively trying to decolonise a curriculum, I really feel like at this moment in time, hopefully, we will get more institutional support as time goes on. But it feels to me that it really is about initiative, like amongst yourselves and your peers, and really trying to unpack like missing, like I guess, yeah, missing pieces, and really, I guess, just trying to advocate that change like within institutions on a smaller level. But yeah, I think again it just felt like a bit of a kind of worms, but I think it was an amazing question. I'm quite interested in what you have to say about it as well, Lucy, actually, because it is such a good and relevant one.
It really is, and thanks for sharing your insights there, Jasmine. I can see that EJ's posted some supplementary information for us to kind of think about, and they were the kind of constraints that I would have imagined. Actually, they've said about the kind of schemes of work that teachers have to follow for the exams, you know, very exam orientated teaching rather than teaching for knowledge or understanding. And they've also mentioned about senior leaders or middle leaders or teachers who are not aware or not interested in decolonisation with the curriculum, which I can imagine could be similar in higher education. If it's not made a kind of compulsory thing for tutors and then students to address, then it's always reliant on those with the kind of passion or motivation. They've said that they're a language teacher and they want to address colonial histories in their curriculum because it's so Eurocentric. Yeah, exactly. Parents and students as well, EJ. So it's kind of expands that. And thank you, Jasmine. You're kind of saying, you know, what the efforts we can make outside in our everyday lives to sort of be anti-racist and facilitate anti-racism. It's so crucial. But I think the question here is like the core of the curriculum. How does that change? You know, and should these things always be remaining on the margins? What's the danger of them remaining on the margins and not in the core? And I kind of think about the collections again that some of you referred to at the British Museum, at the Crystal Palace Museum, Wikipedia as a collection where things are curated and who's got control of this, you know, who's gatekeeping this knowledge. It kind of makes me think of that. And if there's no interest or motivation, or actually if there's the reverse, if there's fear for addressing decolonisation because it's seen as not a neutral, or it's too political a term to be operating, then yeah, it's a difficult territory to be walking in. But you know, I'm really kind of confident that within the realm that we're working in, that we've been given support, encouragement, a very open invitation to be exploring this. I've not experienced any limits in the work I've been doing in the teaching environment that I operate in. Quite the opposite. But I think we could have another discussion talking about the compulsory education sector. And in fact, it's something that I know that a group of students who I work with at UAL called LCC Changemakers, they're really interested in, because they feel like there is quite a difference in the opportunity and encouragement we might have in higher education to have these kind of critical discussions compared to, you know, what might be happening in compulsory education. Did anyone else want to comment on that from their experience or? No, okay. Well, thank you so much for those questions. That's taken us into a kind of another interesting area to consider. I don't know if anyone wanted to ask any other questions or make any other comments on what we've been talking about this evening in the time that we've got left.
I maybe for the Art Assassins people, maybe if they could talk about what they thought using the technological platform as opposed to maybe making a exhibition in the physical world with physical objects, and what the kind of technical stuff and the VR brought to them, and maybe like, because obviously it comes with a payoff against like barriers for skills, like what they thought about that.
If right, I'll start and answer that question. But I think that I think the VR world was actually gave us a bit more control than you would have in, say, exhibiting in a museum gallery space, because you not only is it like free, and all you need is internet to access it, but you can edit so many different parts of it. You can add like an audio element, you can add pictures, text files, kind of any kind of information you can put in there. And I think, kind of as Lucy's touched on, we wanted the work that we did to be just completely accessible to anyone who wanted to look at the work, to anyone who wanted to add to the work, contribute. And so I actually really liked the digital space, but I think I found it like a little bit easier because I've been doing a year in computing and kind of software design and development, and so like this, that's kind of why the project kind of initially appealed to me as well. So yeah, Sam, if you want to share as well.
I know, I was maybe just going to say that I thought one of the things that was quite good about working in the digital environment was that because you're building up from basically a blank space, it gave us some opportunities to maybe consider about what the implications are of the spaces that, you know, archive materials might generally get shown in. You know, how would showing something in a museum affect how the contents are received as opposed to showing it in a gallery, and what kinds of just general gear for showing things in physical space, how that affects how they're perceived and stuff. So I think we had some interesting conversations along those lines.
That was a great question, Louis. Thank you so much. It kind of got me thinking about something I was reflecting on as people were giving their presentations about just how, like, historical information or opinion can quite often in traditional formats of printed text or museum display can be so reductive, you know, and so much choice and bias is inevitable in the fact that physical space offers us so little. You know, we have to choose. Do I show this or that? How much text do I put? Do I credit that person or not? And then I just think with the digital and the kind of layers and the hyperlinks and the kind of multifaceted dimensions of digital interfaces, it just opens up, I think, much more possibilities for these kind of the multiple perspectives that I think we're all kind of agreeing are just so needed, especially in support of kind of social justice, anti-racism and decolonizing sort of discourses. Yeah, I just feel like there's more possibilities there, and it doesn't even have to be messy. I think some of the digital technologies and even editing a Wikipedia page is still these sort of frameworks and good practices that can help it to be complex and multi-layered, but still possible to navigate through it, you know. I'm just thinking about, just to mention here, Nothing's certain, but the conversations with the Crystal Palace Museum at the moment are really exciting, you know, that they are a really small physical space that can't show everything from their archive. There's just not the physical space for it, but the possibilities of Wikipedia pages, open source VR, augmented reality and apps to be able to enable all of that information plus interpretation from the many peoples who feel that they have something to say about these histories, is made possible through digital and open source. And then it's not closed. It can be something that people can keep contributing to, so that it doesn't give that impression that this is the story and this is how it should be told, wrapped up, but it's much more open. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking about. And it's been really great to see some examples of the possibilities, like the early stages of what that could look like for the museum with the work that our partners at the South London Gallery have been doing. So thank you so much, Sam, Harriet and Jasmine, for unlocking that potential as a group. And thank you so much, Ural, Chrisern and Xiaoling and Louis for hosting an in-curricular project that can help us to understand just how we could start to overcome some of these data bias with some more sophisticated and intelligent ways forward with information gathering. And thank you, Richard, for commenting on, you know, how this journey's been for you and Wikimedia UK over the past academic year. It's been really great having everyone here together. So I'm going to kind of wrap up on that note. This is the final public discussion for this academic year in the project that as it's been formulated for this academic year. But watch this space and we'll see what the future holds for the Decolonising Wikipedia with partners close by and further afield. Thank you all.
Cool. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank
you. And well done to everyone involved.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you.